That's all done. Brilliant. Okay, that's great. So what I want to do is basically for the benefit of the ones which are new who have joined, just very briefly showing the diploma structure. Now, when we look at this particular qualification, there are 14 units that we're going to study. Some of you have studied 8, 9, 4, 5 different, wherever you are in your, but there are 5 subject areas. So one of the bits that I want you to understand at the start of the program is that there are these subject areas in which we will study these core units. So one subject area is study skills. Second subject area is introductory units, which are predominantly to help build your foundation on healthcare and nursing. There is another area, subject area called health studies. Then we have social issues in healthcare, and then we have human physiology. So in human physiology, there are 2 core units that we are studying: infectious diseases and human aspects of human physiology. Social care, we are studying, these 4 units. So safeguarding, principles of safeguarding in health and social care actually falls under the subject area of social issues in health and social care. And then we studied a previous unit, which was essentially the research project, which is also within this area, health and social care provision, which is also within this area, and effective communication, which was delivered by Shazia, is also within this subject area. So this diploma structure I can email to you so that you are able to have it at your end, and you know what units, what are the unit codes, what are the credits of these units, and which unit you have studied. This is something that we maintain as a soft copy as well. And I think what has happened in the last day or two, Jill, who's the course coordinator, she has sent across you individual emails to say, these are the units you have completed, and these are the units which are pending, from a point of view of existing learners who are on this course. Now, if I just switch you over to the unit specification that we are looking at discussing. So in this particular unit, as you can see, we are going to be looking at discussing things around, the core areas of, safeguarding. Now, safeguarding is a broader topic, is a very big topic. It has become something mandatory as a training, which all people working within the sector have to do. And this would involve studying the unit, in 4 learning outcomes. And these 4 learning outcomes will allow us to cover this subject matter in detail. It will look at starting off with principles of safeguarding, go into what and how do we look at spotting abuse and harm which is being caused. How do we look at implementing a policy of safeguarding when you undergo training? How do you look at whistleblowing? How do you look at your role? And how do you look at protecting people who are vulnerable and are being exploited? And there are various types that we will look at in the first learning outcome. Then we are also going to go into understanding the how to minimize the possibility of abuse. So each of the learning outcome has 2 assessment criteria, 1.1, 1.2, similarly 2 in the 2 learning outcome, 3rd and 4th as well. And we are going to be looking at systematically dwelling into this area in a bit more detail. So we'll be looking at about 4 sessions, followed by an assignment discussion session to cover this particular unit in great amount of detail. Now, this unit is fully populated on Moodle. I don't know, some of you, if you've gone ahead and looked at the Moodle, and what I've done on Moodle right now is that you are able to see this unit with presentations, some of the additional handouts which are required for you to look at reading. And this would be in addition to the PowerPoint slides and the discussion that we are going to do during this particular session. So if I just quickly move you to Moodle and make sure that you are able to see this particular unit. So if I go into nursing, and when I go into nursing, I scroll down, and what I would see is principles of safeguarding. This is in a yellow color outline box. So here we have the unit specification that I've just shown you. This is the assignment brief Word document, which you will download And then we have the 4 learning outcomes which have been organized in the fashion which is learning outcome 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just reorganizing them 1, 2, 3, and 4. And obviously we've got 1 or 2 key handouts that we want to look at. And then what I've also done is uploaded a sample assignment for you, how you would go about doing the assignment, because there's a case study involved in this. This is a graded unit, which would mean that the minimum word count is 3,500. So you would need to look at addressing the case study in such a way that you're able to cover it up and also meet the word count requirement. Now, this is an indicative word count. That means, you are allowed to have a maneuverability of plus minus 10%. But I cannot have a case wherein you basically submit an assignment which is 2,000 words. So plus minus 10% would mean 3,500, 10% of that is 350 words. So you could submit something like 3,150, 3,150 words, or you could submit like 3,850 words, and that would be acceptable. But if you submit 3,000 or 2,000 or 1,500, that wouldn't be acceptable as an assignment. So what I've done here is I've given a bit of a steer in terms of making sure that you have the case study in the right perspective. You're able to explain the case study in terms of introduction, then talk about breaking the role up, because the case study muddles everything up in terms of the learning outcomes that you have to cover. So what we have to do is, when you do the assignment, here it says first task is, it says LO2. So in LO2, what we have to do is cover these 2 parts, which is what is the action that you will take if there is a suspected abuse that is happening, and what is the role of agencies and practitioners in safeguarding. And that is what would allow you to address the word limit if you understand the learning outcomes and then do it accordingly. So I put the role of the practitioner in the agency. I've interpreted the introduction of the case study, and then I've looked at types of abuse and systems. So because the case study is given as a scenario, you're open to doing interpretations the way you want to do it, and then use the context of what we're going to study in the unit to complete and write the assignment in such a way that it meets at least 3,150 words without references, to be able to complete and do the write-up of the assignment. We'll go into this in a bit more detail, but I'm just showing it to you that all the content that we have to study in this particular unit is now available on Moodle, and it is in a yellow colored box. Some of the other units which we have studied are also available. Some of the others which you have studied and have completed, I've faded them out, because the idea here is to focus on the unit that we are studying now and the unit we have studied before, so that you're able to at least complete these 2 as we go along, rather than go back and forth and study other units which were delivered a couple of weeks or months back for some of the existing learners. Now, one of the other things which I just want to very briefly, when I say briefly, I would probably look at 4 or 5 minutes. I want to also focus on today is to show, because some of you are on, the meeting, I want to basically showcase in terms of, how an assignment has to be done. The reason I want to do this is because I've been catching up with a lot of your assessments that you have submitted so far. So I have summaries that I've drawn up for each of you. And those summaries that I've drawn up for each of you, have been shared by Jill. We have, obviously compiled and made sure that a lot of assessments which were pending have now all been completed. So you should have feedback on all the units that you have submitted so far, whether you've passed, you've not passed, whether you've had a grade achieved on it, whether it's a pass or an achieved or not achieved. And in some cases, if it's a graded unit, whether you've achieved a pass, merit, or distinction. Now, I'm not going to pick out anybody, but I'm just going to show you one particular assignment. And I think some of you would have received an email from me, earlier today, which will basically mention a couple of things related to, feedback on the assignment. Now, the reason that has been done and that has been mentioned is because when we look at a cover sheet for the assignment, if I just share this with you for a second, the one that we are looking at studying right now. So what I would want to do is when I look at, say a particular assignment, this particular part that you see is called the cover sheet, right? Now, this cover sheet, when you submit an assignment, has to be filled up. I want to be very clear on today's discussion for this 5 minutes is that I'm not in the business of filling your cover sheet. If this is how you write your name, that is your problem. But at the end of the day, this is a very basic aspect of how you're going to submit assignments across the course. And maybe as a guidance for some of you who are new, who have joined, would need to, get and understand this as a first off. So if it says student signature, and if you haven't written your name here, so, there is no way that this is your assignment, So I need to write what is the word count. They have not been created as rows or columns just for the sake of doing it. So when I fill it up, I will fill up these areas which I'm required to do. What was the date on which the assignment was set? That means on the day we started the unit. So today we are starting the safeguarding unit. So today's date will come on the date set. What is the date due? When we complete the unit. So we are going to do 5 sessions for this unit as an example. And when we do these 5 sessions, so we are having 1 today, 2 next week, and 2 followed by the week after. So that means this unit will be finished by 30th of April. So due date of this would be 2 weeks after the date on which we cover and finish the unit. So that means 15th of May would be the submission date for the assignment. Now, if you have submitted before that, you can mention a date here. If not, then obviously we will put the date submitted, because when you email it to us, that makes it an electronic submission, and the date comes from the email that you have sent on what day it has been sent. Now, you follow the assignment brief. That is great. Some of you have got into it now. And towards the end, what we do is basically insert a page at the end of the assignment brief. And when we insert a page, I think if you guys struggle, my suggestion would be to do a quick course of how to make and format documents on Microsoft Word. There's a Google YouTube video link, which I can send across after this session. My suggestion would be you will need to do this simply because it will be useful for you to understand how you're going to format your documents. Now, one of the key things that you would look at is when you send in your document, please proofread your work. This is not going to be acceptable. I'm being quite lenient, but obviously when you go to university, this is going to be non-acceptable because your document isn't properly proofread or, has grammatical errors in terms of, basic submission of the assignment. If you see, you might need to, start improving some bits of it. And that's the whole idea. Some of you are doing the foundation diploma is because you would need to develop these soft skills that are required to basically, do the assignment. Now, when you do the assignment, as you can see, all this is being picked up in Microsoft Word. I think it's £59, and you can have 6 licenses of it. This is a basic minimum I would suggest. I know money is doesn't grow on trees, but obviously, if you use Google Docs or if you use, for example, Microsoft Word, there is an editor which is in Microsoft Word, and it allows you to just, make these changes in a couple of seconds. As you can see, there are 30 spelling mistakes, 85 grammar mistakes. There are punctuation conventions. And, this is not acceptable at the university level. The reason why it is acceptable now, and I can give you some guidance on it, is because you're doing level 3. And this is where it's a part of your study skills to be able to do this. Now, when I submit my assignment, obviously I can do it in a way wherein I want to do it. But, generally speaking, font size 12, spacing of 1.5. You could follow a bit of a professional norm in terms of following the same font which has been used in the assignment brief. If you don't want to, that is absolutely fine. But what I would do is basically go in, select your assignment, change it to font size 12, change it. You would see it decreases the number of pages. I will probably put it in the same font as Calibri, which is the font of the, assignment brief. And wherever possible, I will insert it to make it more presentable, as you can see. But there are so many mistakes. It takes about 20-30 minutes for me to actually look at your assignment. And, there are a few on the call, and I don't want to, be repetitive or bore you on this, but it is a very basic thing that you would need to do yourself before you even submit the assignment, so it becomes presentable. Now, this particular assignment has a bit of a word limit. So if you're not meeting the word limit, what will happen is this will be referred back to you because it says 2,000 words. And if 2,000 words are not met, then there is no way that this assignment will meet the cut. And obviously, it's a graded unit. It is an important unit. So if I have to look at the word count, I will go ahead and select everything that you've written. And, I should be able to see a word count pretty much, which says 2,000 words. So it's 2041. And what I would then do is basically write the word count here, 2041, without references. So minimum is 2,000, and she has met that limit of 2,000. And when we check it, what we are going to do is obviously give you some commenting on it to say why you've met the assignment or why you have not met the assignment and why you have met the grade. And there is no room for personal judgment at my end because the awarding body has made it absolutely clear in terms of what and how the assessment has to be done. So they've defined it clearly. Whether you have the understanding of the study, I need to say yes. Application of skill is, as you can see, not there. So in this case, I will put no. And then overall grade, if you see, generally in some places I put some crosses and some of the bits, are weak. And that is why the learners only secured a pass on this assignment. Now, this is a must. When you're doing the assignment, please make sure that you spend 2-3 hours at least in terms of writing it. If you're spending more time, then please make sure that you're spending at least 20 minutes before you send the assignment over to actually proofread it and spell check it to make sure it is having proper grammar, proper formatting. And this is one of the main points that I've stressed on today's email. Now, one last thing which I would want to mention here very briefly with regards to the assignment and assignment submission is that when you submit the assignment, if I look at sending an email, your basic courtesy should be that you at least write the subject on the email to say this is your assignment or this is your assignment that you're submitting. Most of you just submit the assignments in a way wherein, just attach the document and send. And if I show you a couple of emails which come through, some of them are coming in from OneDrive. Some of them we are not able to download the assignments because they need permissions. There is no naming or wording on it. And you're submitting some of the assignments to us in PDF. There is no way that I can do any commenting on it unless we get the assignments in a Word format. Now, I've shown you an assignment which I've formatted, and I will show you an assignment that you are going to see now in terms of the little bigger screen. But the idea here is to show you the perspective in terms of how long it takes for us to mark the assignment. Now, if you see this particular assignment which was submitted, there are bits and pieces which we have corrected, bits and pieces which have been put. And then there is commenting which has been done on the right hand side. Now, this will not be visible to you if you open it on Microsoft Word. In your phone or on your tablet. This will be available only visible to you if you open it on your laptop or your PC. Right? You see all the spelling mistakes, grammar has gone in the assignment. So it took me 1.5 hours to mark it. There are still some mistakes, but at least grammatical mistakes are not there. It is formatting mistakes which I've left out. But as you can see, detailed commenting has been done to ensure that you are meeting the pass mark criteria. Harvard referencing, I don't know in terms of why this has been used, but you need to look at doing a bit of a training. And you can use site generators like, site generator to do Harvard referencing. But because in some cases you're putting across just the references from website, this will be problematic simply because all your data is coming across from sites which have already published some work. And there is no in-text referencing anywhere, as you can see. So this bit has to be carefully looked into. Now we have marked the assignment, but we have not run it through a plagiarism scanner. But if we run it through a plagiarism scanner, and if it is over 20%, then the problem will be that you'll have to paraphrase and rewrite some of the work that is required to be done as an assignment. So this is an example of an assignment which I've shown you, which is probably an area wherein some of them have submitted, and obviously it is just barely scraped the mark in terms of achieving the unit. I'm going to try and also show you an assignment primarily which has been submitted by another learner. And this assignment, if you look at and the way it has been presented, has the same set of mistakes and detail, but it is owned up by the student because the name and other bits have been done. And if you see, this is the original submission. So there's a proper assignment with the student number mentioned on it, and then there's a table of content, and then the wordings of the assignment in terms of whatever the learner has presented. This is the original submission I'm showing you. Right? Now, when we gave feedback, there was missing parts, and what she has done is she's added them basis the comment and feedback given, and this has been highlighted in yellow, which is a standard practice. Look at the referencing which has been done. This shows the depth of research which the learner has gone through in writing this assignment. Okay, now, if I show you another version of the same assignment just from another learner who's undergoing certification right now, and you look at the kind of work which has been submitted and the kind of work which has come through, you would be surprised because you are also doing the same course. As you can see, everything is pretty much filled up. Word count is mentioned. It's a case study. This is the original submission. There's no feedback on this. This is just the original submission. As you can see, a word of clear heading, unit code with the table of content, and then look at the assignment. I will show you feedback on this as well. So if I close this now, and I close this now, and if I go into the feedback which is being submitted by the learner, and we marked this particular assignment, you would see that it takes me just about half an hour to mark this assignment because everything is in proper order, everything is filled. She's achieved a merit grade on this assignment simply because it shows the depth of research, the application, the examples which are required to be used in the assignment. I will also show you one assignment in which there are lots of pictures being used, and the pictures and the figures have also been clearly referenced. You see the depth at which the learner has taken. In 1.1 that she has attempted, this is just references for 1.1. This is for 2.1. This is for 2.2, 3.1, 3.2. Look at how detailed the referencing is for some of the tasks which have been done. And no doubt the learner is achieving merit because of the detailed work which has been referenced, and in-text referencing has been done, and obviously the work is meeting and showing application of theory and good practice with the use of examples to be able to hit merit. I'll show you another assignment just in case. And this is a sampler which I can share. I don't have a problem in sharing because the learner is already completed. And if you see this particular assignment, this is the original submission. Right? And I want to show you some images which have been used in some of the assignments, and the way it has been presented, is absolutely brilliant. And she's achieved a distinction on some of the work which has been done. Look at the depth of referencing which has been used, which shows the kind of material she's used to go in and, do the assignment. So obviously, this helps the assessors to reach a conclusion that the learner has actually gone into researching the work to make sure that it is then hitting merit/distinction criteria. This is a brief history of medicine. And in this assignment, she's achieved distinction. Everything is covered in terms of data which she can write or she can, mention. Nothing is, merit again on this, sorry. And as you can see, the depth of work being presented is absolutely, it gives me great joy to read this particular assignment because, obviously I can see the work which has been put in. So some of you who are putting in the work and are doing the assignments, are absolutely fine. But if I show you this is how the assignment comes. This is a PDF document. I can't do any commenting on this. PDF documents are being sent. Sometimes they come on a shared drive. So I'm not picking up on anybody, but just very briefly sharing that, if this is the way the assignments come, and if I try and open it now, you will see that does not allow me to open the assignment. So it's a waste of my time and obviously your time if you are not able to, at least put in the assignment in a way wherein you send it on email, and that assignment has a proper heading. As you can see, this document, I don't know what document is this. If I open this up, I know there's an assignment on academic writing skills, and she has done a good work on this. She has passed this particular unit, but look at some areas which need improvement in terms of references. You don't have a single reference, you have references, NS has required. And these are things which are being picked up by the external examiner, because we are required to give you feedback so that you're able to develop these things, in the assignments that you submit. So some bits of work that I would suggest that you have to put focus on is that the proof of the pudding, which is the assignments that you submit, it is absolutely imperative for you to essentially spend a bit of time before you submit this assignment. It is not a case that you can come to the college and we can do this work for you. No, this is not something that we can do for you. This is something we can teach you once, twice, but after that, you have to follow it through as a process. And it is absolute requirement, because this is going to be making and breaking, and obviously looking at helping you to, score your grades, because you want to look at a good grade on your units. And there are 5 units in this particular course which are graded, and if you get higher grades on that, your overall grade can move to merit, or overall grade can move to distinction. So it is important. I think from my point of view, some bit is learning, some bit you can pick up, but obviously everything requires a bit of work. Nothing happens just for the sake of happening. You have to put some work in, and that would allow you to reach this particular stage. There is everything available. When I was growing up and I was studying, there was nothing called Google. If it was there, it was out of reach. You're only in libraries. We couldn't afford a PC. But today, everything is available at a click of a button in our homes. And I think it is a matter of time. When you spend about an hour or so and you submit it in a way wherein it is required to be submitted, it makes it easier for us to also access work and, send you feedback very quickly. And I think what I realized is, when I marked all your assignments, I don't think there is anything pending at my end. And I marked pretty much all the assignments. If it were all 1 or 2 are pending. But one of the things which I've now noticed, and what I've done is I've taken this opportunity of sending it across to everyone on the email, is because this is the very basic that you have to look at as far as, writing of your assignments is concerned. So this is a summary of what I picked out. Some of you are using maybe some AI software, and obviously it can be clearly seen with the difference in the font, the color of the font, and the change of tone of voice when you're writing. So that will not be acceptable, because if you put it into the plagiarism scanner and it comes up that it detects that it has been written by an AI software, then obviously the assignment is going to be disqualified. It is not acceptable by the by Ascentis as a body. And in the last couple of weeks, all the awarding bodies, because of ChatGPT and other softwares which are available, they've issued very serious warnings to centers to be able to use AI software to be able to detect if the assignment has been written by using one of the artificial intelligence softwares. So you have to make sure that you complete your cover sheet. You take time before you submit your assignment. You spell check and proofread it. You ensure your assignment is formatted properly. Develop Harvard referencing skills, by undertaking the training, which is on Moodle. Watch the video, look at the presentation, use Site Generator or Microsoft Word to be able to do referencing. It is important for you to meet the word count, because doing the assignment means you have to meet the word count, which is given in this case by Ascentis, an awarding body. If they had not mentioned a word count, that's different. But if it's a word count mentioned, plus minus 10% is possible, but nothing below or above that. You can go above that, but nothing below will be possible for you to pass that work. Do not use any softwares, or, if you look at using it, then sometimes you have to be intelligent enough to paraphrase things to be able to write. And I've clearly picked out some places wherein, this has happened. Then in some cases, make sure you're using, US English and not, UK English, not US English. There's a subtle difference. And I've highlighted that by writing it out, because this is a basic bit that you have to do when you look at using the software. Most of your assignments are coming in US English, and what we have to do is change the language. By default, change it. And once we change it, then we mark it. And again, these are bits, which university will not give you opportunities of. They will clearly flag this off saying, please proofread your work and resubmit. And every time you resubmit, it goes on Turnitin, and then, your similarity increases. You have to paraphrase your work. So it increases your work at your end and also our work, because the assignment is not coming on time. So these are very important small guidelines which I've mentioned, that some of you who have submitted units already, some of you who are looking at submitting units, please make sure that you're submitting it as a Word document. Submit it with the subject heading, which is clearly written of what assignment you're submitting, what grade you're trying to achieve. You're not doing me any favors, to be honest. If you just send me an attachment and say, here's my assignment, these are my last 2 assignments, what is it that you're trying to achieve in the grade? I'm only going to pass it for pass mark then. Then please don't come back to us later to say, okay, I have not got merit or distinction on it. You have to take out 5 minutes and maybe draft an email to say that, okay, I'm looking at, if this is a graded unit, I'm looking at this particular mark. So I would be great, I would love to get feedback on it so that I can achieve or better my grade. Because there is an aspect of how you want to look at it, and that's a personal choice. But basically, having an attachment coming in the email, I'm only looking at it for marking for pass then, because you have not asked for whether you're looking at merit grade or a distinction grade. So until that is being asked for, if you don't ask, you don't get. As simple as that, because I've also got lots of work to do. So in my case, if it is not being asked, I'm not going to give you the feedback. In some units, obviously, it's only achieved. That's fine. But in some units, it is a graded unit, and exactly there are 5 or 6 graded units, because they are 6 credits, and they are definitely meeting the word criteria. And you would need to show application, you would need to do discussion, and that is where it will allow you to achieve that grade. So it is very important for you to look at doing this. So this bit was maybe something I should have done yesterday, but because we didn't have a session yesterday, I want to get on with completing everything in terms of all the pending assessments which have now been done. Now we are on track. So when you submit an assignment, you'll get feedback straight away. And then the idea would be the assignment also comes into us in a format which is accessible and which is markable. Because you yourself have seen, I've seen some of you on the course, there's a journey that you've been on. So I know the extra effort which Jessica has put in, come in, sat with Victor, and she's taken time out on a different day, come in and formatted the assignment, learned it, and then submitted again, which is great, which shows me the effort that she's putting. Same is the case with Christine, same is the case with Famida, some of the ones which are, obviously, let's say, doing a bit of catching up on some of these things. But some of you, ATHE, for example, Rosemary, the assignments have been perfect. The first few ones that you've submitted, you've made the cut straight away, which is great, because you have these skills you need to further improve on to be able to look at maybe higher grades, because some of you are only getting a pass grade on some of the core units like brief history of medicine, infectious diseases, aspects of human physiology, research project. These are units which are graded, and you should be looking at achieving a higher grade, because you're writing the content 2,000-3,000 words, but because the applications are missing, or the examples are missing, or maybe the research is not showing the amount of work that you have put in, that is where probably the grades are not being met. So I would suggest that maybe a separate session we will do on this, when we do the assignment for this. And I normally tend to be quite detailed, because I don't want to leave anything to chance. And I would want all of you to achieve the highest grades possible, so that, it's a proud moment and a good feeling for me as well, that, you have been able to achieve what you actually set out in terms of what your achievement you wanted to get. So it is going to be useful for me as well. And I think it's a two-way process. You can ask questions, you can raise queries, but at the end of the day, when you submit the work, you have to put that in, because I know that I've put in my work, I've done my bit. So I want to see the output of the work coming in a particular format, which is, deserving of that grade. Is that okay? Good stuff. So for those of you who are not present, what I'm going to do is send them a copy of this recording, and hopefully that will be useful for them when they look at offline. Right. Let's get on with the unit today, which is what we are looking at the first session in terms of safeguarding. And what I would want to do is cover the learning outcome 1 today, which is giving you a bit of a background in terms of what is safeguarding and, what are the key factors that we look at from a purposes of why this has become something very important, within the health and social care sector, specifically after the introduction of, the Health and Social Care Act of, 2014. Now, a couple of things that we look at before we, get into the detailing of the learning outcome, just to look at the specific meaning of the term, what is safeguarding? Safeguarding is basically used, more so in the context of European Union, especially in UK and Ireland, which denotes, that there are people which need protection when they receive health and healthcare services. And this is primarily because these people are either vulnerable or have some sort of a disability, and they can be open to abuse, neglect. And abuse can happen not just because somebody is physically abusing them, but it could happen because they've been neglected. It could also happen if they are left on their own, and because they do not have the sense and whereabouts of being able to take care of them, they can also inflict what is called self-harm. So safeguarding as a concept is now pretty much, widely accepted as one of the main, things that we need to look at when we inspect a particular organization or a particular, place. And this applies, to everyone, including children, adults, and people with disabilities. And what we need to be able to do is, if we do see that, safeguarding is not happening, or we are not protecting people who can be put into harm's way or can be abused, or they can, because of neglect, they can be taken advantage of, then in that case, what we are looking at is not following what is being prescribed in law by the government, specifically when they are looking at, availing health and social care services. So safeguarding is an action that is taken to basically promote the welfare of children. It initially started off in schools and protect them from harm's way. It also looks at protecting children, not just from, children, and not just children, but also adults from abuse, maltreatment, and obviously preventing any harm which can be done to the health of an individual, whether that's a child, young person, or a vulnerable, or an adult, or a vulnerable adult because of disabilities. This concept is a term which originated in the UK and in Ireland, and it denotes that we need to be able to protect people and give them the certain amount of rights which are required as individuals, so that they are able to avail of these services. When I say these, I mean health and social care services under the clause of, safeguarding. Now, this particular, concept came to the forefront when it was included in the Health and Social Care Act of 2014. So it became mandatory. When we look at Ofsted, we look at, CQC, some of the main organizations, we do see that they have made it mandatory within organizations to ensure that there is safeguarding, which means protecting a citizen's health and well-being, and ensuring that they have their human rights protected, thereby enabling them to ensure that they are able to get care without neglect, without abuse, and without harm. And this has now become an integral part of the National Health Service in the UK and in some of the other countries like Ireland. So the Care Act basically provisions and ensures that if it is an institution which is providing services on social care, providing services on healthcare or mental health care, there is, the principles of safeguarding implemented, and provisions for safeguarding of adults, children, people with disabilities are there within the institution. Now, when this concept originated, obviously it has undergone some sort of change, but basically there are 6 principles of safeguarding, and they kind of border around, these 6 aspects, which are empowerment, prevention, proportionality, protection, partnership, and accountability. We'll go into all of these in a bit more detail in the subsequent slides, but I just wanted to put a bit of context here before we start that, okay, safeguarding is, what is safeguarding? It's about people and organizations ensuring that we are working together to be able to prevent and stop the risk and abuse which can happen because of neglect, and at the same time making sure that people who need the utmost attention, who need our protection, are able to get it under the Safeguarding Act, which is now a part and parcel of the Health and Social Care Act of 2014. Now, there are lots of roles and responsibilities of safeguarding within an organization, within the local authority, within the NHS, within the devolved government. When we look at Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, there are lots of different types of bodies, and these bodies and providers, public and private, ensure that there are key people in place, there are relationships, values, and systems and processes in place which ensure that people are not mistreated, people are not abused, people are not put in harm's way. And the whole idea of these organizations, bodies, agencies, national agencies working in tandem is to ensure that at the end of the day, what we are looking at ensuring is that people get the care they need without the experience of being put into harm's way, being abused, being neglected, and they get the care which is required for them to be able to get better or get well soon, or get back on their feet if they are receiving any sort of service within the National Health Service. Now, this part is covered under what is called the Care Act 2014 under Section 42. Obviously, the Care Act is a very big document, but safeguarding in general under the Care Act is covered under what is called Section 42. So those of you who want to maybe note specifically, this part is covered under, if I put it down here, under Section 42 of the Care Act of 2014. Now, let's watch a quick series of videos, which are short videos of 2-3 minutes, but they basically give us a very good context in terms of what is safeguarding before we get into some of the assessment criteria and go into understanding the different types of abuse, neglect, or harm which can be done if safeguarding as an act or as a as a policy is not provisioned within a health and social care organization or within the National Health Service. So let me just share that video with you. Give me 1 second. Here we go. So I'm going to play this video. Just make sure that you are able to hear it and obviously see it. The link is available on the presentation, but the idea is these are a series of 3 or 4 videos which will give us a scenario, explain the concept of safeguarding, and what is our role, what is society's role, what is the role of agencies, and it takes us through very, very quickly and briefly through some of these key concepts that we need to be aware of in safeguarding that we will discuss with the presentation slides. Is everyone able to see this and hear this? I've just paused it for a second, but are you able to see it, see the screen and, hear the video? If not, then do let me know by the chat route.
Yeah.
Imagine that you live next door to a single mother and a 5-year-old son. Every morning you see her leave for work, but realise the child is being left at home by himself. How do you think the child feels being left all alone every day? What kind of danger is it? Or imagine you suddenly see a pregnant woman running out of her house crying in the middle of the winter with no coat or even shoes. What do you think might be happening? You do. Or how would you react if you were a council worker on a visit to support a housing tenant? You discovered a disturbing scene of self-neglect and clear signs of mental illness. All throughout Haringey, there are people in trouble. Children and adults who are vulnerable and living in conditions or experiencing situations where they are in danger of harm and abuse. But you can help to make them safer. These films will show you how. All of these stories and people are real, and so are the opportunities for you to make a difference. So what do we mean?
There are lots of videos on the web, and this is one which has been produced by Haringey Council, which is based somewhere in the outskirts of London, but these videos highlight what is safeguarding, what is your role, what kind of benefits it provides to people when we look at implementing safeguarding and safeguarding policies within an organization. And last but not the least, what could be the use of practical and real life examples. They've explained where and how does abuse happen, where does neglect happen, and where do we leave people into harm's way if we do not catch the signs of neglect, specifically when we talk about safeguarding. So let me try and increase the volume.
Safeguarding is protecting children and adults at risk from harm and abuse. It's about promoting their welfare. People don't always know they're being abused, so we all have the opportunity to help and protect them. How do we safeguard children and adults? By paying attention to signs of abuse and telling someone about it. Watch this true story about safeguarding. Think about how you would react in this situation and what you could do to make a difference.
I went out on a home visit one day, myself and a colleague, to talk to the tenant about rent arrears and their benefits. And on getting there, knocked on the door, child answered the door on the inside, didn't open the door, and asked who it was. I said, I was from the council, needed to speak to the mother. He said, well, my mom's not here. And I instantly realized, okay, this child I was talking to couldn't have been more than 5, 6 years old, chatting with us very freely through the letterbox. At first he said she popped out to the shops, and then we said, okay, we'll wait until she came back. Half an hour later, she still wasn't back. And at this point, we started to get a bit concerned. When I realized that the child was on their own, I was anxious, worried. The neighbor confirmed that the parent, they were a single mother, often left the child to go to work, so she would leave the child on their own. I had contacted my manager, who then contacted social services, and social services came in and took over the situation. It could have happened on a different occasion where the child could have come to harm, because anything could happen. That is neglect.
Hello, the volume is out.
The 2014 Care Act includes several types of abuse that are important to understand and learn how to identify. For example, physical abuse can be hitting, pushing, or pulling a vulnerable person. Listen to this example and imagine how you would feel to be physically abused.
My name is Charlotte. I've got cerebral palsy. About 4 years ago, when I moved out of my parents' house to live independently, I was in an accommodation in Tottenham, which was a supported living. Me and another service user didn't get along, and it got quite physical. The person in question, he got quite violent with me, and he tried to throw me down the stairs. Obviously, I screamed for my life, and that's when the member of staff managed to pull us apart, and then she called the police. Luckily, there was no broken bones or anything. If it wasn't for that particular staff, I don't think I would be able to.
The types of abuse covered in the Care Act include sexual abuse, psychological or emotional abuse, and financial or material abuse, like in the story of Mr. Smith and the post office from the first film. But all of those forms of abuse can happen in the most intimate of settings, the family home.
Something was amiss, could have noticed that something wasn't quite right, but failed to do that. In this particular case, police came into the nail parlour on a search on a routine visit, and it was at that point that she was detected as a victim of trafficking, that she was able to come out and then subsequently received the attention that she needed. She's very well now. She was with us for an extended period of time. We needed to provide a little bit more support due to her vulnerability, intense English language learning, lots of English lessons, and yeah, we were able to assist her to move forward.
These and other stories show what a huge impact abuse can have on people's lives, how abuse can make vulnerable people feel helpless, afraid and alone, how you can play a crucial part in giving them a chance to get help. In our next film, you'll hear some more stories that show examples of people just like you that noticed abuse and took action, which made a big difference. Safeguarding is a power that each of us have and that we can use to prevent and stop abuse in all corners of the borough. Parks, schools, shops, everywhere. All we need to do to activate that power is to pay attention, notice when something is wrong and tell someone about it. That's especially important when it comes to protecting children.
A PE teacher is teaching his class one day and he observed that a 6-year-old boy had a bruise on his left arm. Looks fresh as well, like it just happened recently. The PE teacher asked the boy what happened and he said, "My mom whipped me with a ruler." But his mom asked him not to say anything to anybody because if he tells the teacher or anybody, he'll be taken away. The PE teacher felt that this is not something that was right and will contact the child protection leader of the school. The child protection lead and the PE teacher was of the view that this needs to be reported to children's services, which they did. Mom denied it and said, "Oh, he fell over and had a bruise." I looked at mom and said, "You need to be honest with me because we'll put support in place for you. We can take you for parenting classes and how to positively discipline your child as opposed to hitting the child." Because the PE teacher took action, we were able to safeguard this child and let mum be aware that there are different ways of disciplining the child. She went to the parenting classes and she learned a lot. And the child is happy at home.
A simple action from the PE teacher in this story transformed this young boy's life. That's what the power of safeguarding children can do. A child is defined as anyone who hasn't yet reached their 18th birthday. Children can be vulnerable to neglect and abuse from anyone they come across in their daily lives, including their own families. The rise of the internet and social media has opened up even more ways for children to be accessed and abused. So it's important to be even more vigilant than ever before for signs of abuse in different forms, including physical, sexual or emotional
abuse, neglect, online abuse or cyberbullying, sexual exploitation, or the influence of extremism leading to radicalization. Listen to these real stories and try to use your knowledge, instinct, and what you've learned so far to spot the danger. Try to think about your day-to-day life. Would you notice these kinds of things? And would you tell someone about it?
A woman started noticing a group of girls visiting a neighbor's house. These girls were aged around 13 to 16. They had their school uniform on, and at the time that they visit this property, it should be the time that should be in school. And the neighbor became concerned because their property was owned by a man, an older man, and she also observed other men too and boys going in and out of the property, and there's a strong smell of weed coming out of that property. She made a referral, and I went in to investigate to see what was going on. I spoke to my manager about this and there were concerns that this guy is known by the police. We made contact with the school and it turned out these girls have been missing school for months. We made contact with the parents, which they were happy about because they had no knowledge that the girls have not been going to school. Through my investigations, I discovered that the young girls were being groomed for sexual exploitations. The neighbour acted swiftly and she took the right action by alerting the social services. If she hadn't done that, this sexual exploitation would have gone on for months. After the investigation and we had our evidence, this man was arrested while the girls were given the good support that they needed. The girls are doing well now. So it was thanks to the neighbour that made the referral. Otherwise, these children would have been in danger.
Imagine you were the neighbour in that story. Would you tell someone about it? That decision could steer those girls away from a very dark future. What a difference you could make.
I was a young lad, approximately 14 years old, and while at school his behaviour had changed, and this is identified by the teacher. And what they'd realised was that he was becoming far more aggressive. It was also identified by other pupils who brought to the attention of the teacher that he had been sharing online extremist, right-wing extremist material with other kids in the school who actually found it quite offensive. The teacher quite rightly made a referral. That referral went to the local authority. What that exposed was a mother who was having difficulty at home with not just the 14-year-old boy but his older brother, who had a very strong sense of right-wing politics. So one of the key things here was that the teacher identified something, they saw something and they reported it. And as a result of that, the family got the support that they required. Had that referral never gone in, the potential consequences were 14-year-old lad may have been set on a path of extremism which could have taken him into a life of criminality. But that didn't happen. That was averted because the vulnerability was identified and the appropriate safeguarding was put in place, which helped him, his family, his mother and his brother.
Using your powers of safeguarding is important and can change people's lives. But what should you be looking out for? Watch the next film to find out.
We're going to look at one or two last videos, just quickly wrapping this up.
After watching our first few films, you've learnt about many different forms of abuse. But how do you spot these dangers? What should you be looking for? What are the signs that tell you to take action? Some signs of abuse are obvious. In the story of the crying pregnant woman running in the street, it was clear something was wrong. But often signs of abuse can be hidden or subtle. The most powerful tool we have for noticing hidden abuse is our instincts. Sometimes we see something that just doesn't feel right. That's a feeling worth paying attention to. This gentleman, young gentleman, he lives within a housing association. He lives on his own. He's got learning difficulties. Because he's considered vulnerable, the neighbours have taken it upon themselves, just to look out for him. They notice that normally this gentleman has visitors who have name badges. They'll say hello. They might stop and say how are things in terms of what's happening on the road. Over the last few weeks, the neighbours notice people coming into his address who wouldn't necessarily be visiting him, younger than him in age. They weren't wearing local authority badges. These people weren't saying hello, they were keeping their heads down. They had hoodies on, baseball caps, unkempt in terms of their dress. One of the neighbours had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, so they felt compelled to notify the local authority in the form of raising a safeguarding alert. We look into it. We find that the property is being taken over by drug dealers. So we contact the police, we contact housing, and through those agencies we get the alleged perpetrators moved on, and he now continues to live there but with extra support coming in just to keep an eye on things. The neighbour in the story uses their instincts to identify danger for the learning disabled man next door. But apart from instincts, there are other signs and indicators that can make it easier to spot abuse. For example, bruising, cuts, burns and other injuries might be a sign of physical abuse, but they could also be due to an accident. So how do we tell the difference? There are parts of the body where accidental injuries occur more often, but injuries in other areas of the body might be a sign of abuse. In the story of the boy in the PE class, it might have been easy for the teacher to assume that the bruise on the boy's arm was accidental, but the location of the bruise on the boy's forearm was a sign that the teacher wisely noticed, signalling the possibility of abuse. But other forms of abuse all have their own possible signs and indicators. Sudden, significant changes in appearance, behaviour or mood might be a sign of abuse. For example, if a normally happy person suddenly seems frequently depressed or angry, A sudden change in finance, debt or spending habits could be a sign of financial abuse. Inappropriately sexualized conduct or conversation, especially in younger people, could be a signal that some form of sexual abuse is going on. If a vulnerable person often seems hungry, cold, unkempt or unclean, this could be a sign of neglect, or in the case of vulnerable adults living alone, self-neglect.
I went to visit a tenant, got to the door and he wouldn't let us in. We then insisted that we took it indoors, which he was very reluctant about, but eventually allowed me to come into his living room. From the point when he opened the door wouldn't open because he had newspapers everywhere. Everywhere. He had bundles and bundles of newspapers everywhere you looked. The place was filthy. His kitchen was dirty. Just no surface to do anything on. It was manky. There was a smell as well. It was pungent. When you walked into his living room, everywhere was covered with stuff. There was boxes, there was newspapers. I saw this open fireplace, which, if it was lit with all these newspapers, would be a complete health and safety hazard, not just to himself, but he lived in a block as well, a block of flats, which was also a double health and safety issue. So it was obviously a safeguarding issue. So after I left the house, I had a senior manager come out to meet me at the flat, and then we did the referrals to the relevant departments. Social services became involved as well to support him with that side of things. He eventually got moved into another property while his property was cleared up, and then he moved back.
Some signs of abuse are clear where others aren't. That's why it's important for all of us to use our eyes, ears and instincts in order to help vulnerable people who may be at risk. But once you've identified possible abuse, what should you do? Our next film will tell you exactly how to take action when you suspect that someone may be in danger.
So this is the last one that we are watching, which is going to complete.
Imagine how much safer vulnerable people would be in Haringey if everyone in the bar was protecting
neglect
them.
and harm.
By now you've learned that safeguarding is something we can all do. And simply by looking out for abuse and reporting it, you're hoping to save people from harm. But how should you report it? What should you do when you spot abuse? Firstly, remember, when reporting any possible abuse, you don't have to provide your name if you wish to remain anonymous. You'll simply be asked to provide as much detail as possible about your concerns. This will help us find the best way to support the person you're worried about. If you've witnessed abuse or suspect possible abuse, there are very specific steps you should take depending on what's happening. Most importantly, if it's an emergency where someone is in immediate danger or needs urgent medical attention, ring 999. If what you're witnessing isn't an emergency, but you think a crime has happened, then phone the police on the non-emergency contact number 101. No matter what, make sure that you've done everything possible to keep yourself, the child or adult in danger, and other people safe. But as you've learned throughout these films, the most important thing you should do if you've seen or suspect abuse is to tell someone about it. If you're working with the council or any company in the borough, tell your line manager, or if that's not possible, tell your manager's manager. And if that's not possible, or you're a member of the public, or if you're a volunteer, contact social services directly, which you can do by ringing any of these numbers during office hours. Or if it's out of office hours, including the weekend, ring 0208 489 0000. After you've made sure to deal with emergencies, possible crimes, or reporting the suspected abuse to someone, it's important to make a record of it by writing down what you've seen, heard, and what you've done. Send an email to yourself, or simply write it down in a journal with details, dates, and times. But just as important as knowing what to do when you've spotted abuse is knowing what not to do. Don't probe or ask leading questions. Just let people tell you their stories and make sure you're clear on what they're trying to say, nothing more. Don't stop them from talking. It's hard for victims to say something. So if they decide to talk, it's important to hear everything they want to tell. Don't destroy evidence. Interfering with anything on the scene of an incident could harm an investigation. Don't discuss the matter with anyone other than your manager, social services, the police, or the emergency services. Don't delay. From all of our stories, it's quite clear that acting quickly and early can have a huge impact. In some cases, it can mean the difference between life and death. Don't promise to keep secrets. Victims may be worried about talking, but assure them that you'll only pass on the information to people that need to know and that can help. If a person chooses to tell you about being abused, try to stay calm, be sympathetic and reassuring, and keep a record of what's happened and what's been said. Many of us in our lives have a deep desire to make more of a difference in the world, to do good, and to help other people. Safeguarding is a very simple, real, and enormously effective way to do just that. Think of all the people in our stories who positively changed other people's lives simply by paying attention, noticing abuse, and reporting it. All the people in our stories who helped safeguard others, changed the lives of vulnerable people and stopped abuse from happening. You can be just like them. You can help to protect.
So as you can see from this particular video, this video gives us a very good insight into the three aspects of what we want to learn in terms of safeguarding. First aspect being looking at, the aspect of abuse. Second being the aspect of harm. And the third being aspect of, neglect. So these 5 videos showcase real life stories, and obviously there are lots of learnings that we can take, from this video in terms of the concept of safeguarding, how local authorities, including councils, social services, healthcare workers, people who are part and parcel of your family, extended family, friends, can actually play a role in ensuring that nobody is put into harm's way or taken advantage of. And in some cases, even neglected, which would mean that they would be then, not getting the desired services that they need to get from, the government, being a citizen in the UK. Now, when we look at safeguarding, it covered all this aspect. So safeguarding encompasses, child protection, prevention of gender-based violence. We are looking at protecting people from sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. We are looking at, obviously taking care of people and providing help in the case when they are neglected. They are also vulnerable emotionally, and an exploitation is taking place in the form of modern slavery. That was an example which was given. And then when people are put in harm's way, or when they are abused or treated unfairly, and that could be taking different, forms of, that will require different forms of safeguarding essentially. Now, after this video, so what I want to do is get a quick, response in terms of how was the video, what have you understood from the video? Let's start with each of you. Quick responses in terms of, were you able to understand the video first?
Yes, but though the volume wasn't working properly, but the little I had, I understand.
All right, okay, that's great. So there were captions on the video, you can watch it later, but the main idea is that you've understood that what is the concept of safeguarding, what it involves, how people can be abused, put in the harm's way, and can even neglect, when we say sometimes leave people to their own, problems, that can also put them into the harm's way and can be open to abuse. Anybody else in terms of what they could make out, what they've learned from the video? All right, okay. As long as you've understood the underlying message in terms of what is safeguarding and, why and how it needs to be put into place, and with the examples that were given across in those videos, it gives you a perspective of why safeguarding is so important, especially when we look at the provision of health and social care services within the society. Now, the first assessment criteria under the learning outcome talks about defining 3 of the following types of abuses. So what I've done in the subsequent slides is I've covered all the different types of abuse. This is primarily abuse. So safeguarding has 3 aspects to it, which is what you will need to remember. So you have harm, you have neglect, and you have abuse. So the first assessment criteria talks about choosing any 3 of them to describe how an abuse can take place. So bullying can be a form of abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, institutional abuse, neglect. We have physical abuse, psychological, and sexual abuse. So let's look at a couple of them just very briefly, although I put slides in for all of them to go in detail. Now, when we talk about bullying, if you look at, I don't know how many of you know the meaning of the word bullying, but when we talk about bullying, we are basically looking at somebody who's intending harm by intimidation or by using coercive, behavior to be able to provide or, do harm to an individual. So in this case, if you're trying to intimidate another person to try and control him, or in this case, if you're trying to use behavior or show aggressive behavior and you're trying to then subvert the other individual, then in those cases or circumstances, we'll be looking at bullying. Bullying can happen in various settings. It can happen in school, at work, even online. And there are loads of examples of what we look at bullying can be or can take form in one or the other form. It could be things like name calling, spreading rumors about or wrongful rumors about something which the individual has not done. It could be exclusion, and it could even be physical violence. Then the second one that we talk about is emotional abuse. Now here, what we do is basically see a pattern of behavior which is designed to control or manipulate a person. And when we talk about that, what we are trying to do is basically use vulnerabilities of an individual to be able to open them to verbal abuse or abuse through any form of intimidation, isolation, or even a concept called gaslighting. Anybody has heard about the concept of what is gaslighting? So gaslight,
No.
no, okay. Gaslighting is a manipulative tactics which is used by one person to gain power or control over another individual. And this tends to be done through the concept of creating self-doubts, or, constantly questioning the individual on certain types of questions in terms of reality. So, sometimes what you're going to try and do is confuse the individual by asking questions which will be, let's say, creating guilt or creating, suspicion, or creating, say, for example, doubts in the mind of the individual that, am I doing this? Am I doing something which is right? Am I correct? Or, it creates those self-doubts. So gaslighting is basically, in short, a manipulative tactics which is used by an individual to overpower their sense of well-being or sense of understanding by asking questions which are going to confuse and create uncertainty in the minds of that individual. And this would then be causes of emotional abuse. Financial abuse, easy to understand. Financial abuse, there was an example given that an old man goes to the grocery store or the newspaper shop every day and, looks at using £20 essentially to be able to buy groceries or things. But one of the times then, somebody starts acting as, a carer and starts withdrawing money, which was in excess of £50. And the shopkeeper essentially raises an alarm. And obviously they later find out that, he's been overrun by people who are dealing with drugs, and they want to take away his savings or his pensions or benefits that he gets, and they've got access to his card. So financial abuse can be when one person is trying to control the other to use their finances, and this could include stealing a property, stealing a card, using manipulation to obtain funds, and even preventing others or himself, the indented individual, from making use of the banking services. And this is done either through force or through the route of some sort of physical oblique emotional abuse. Now, there are other forms of abuses that we also talk about, which is institutional abuse, which is there is mistreatment or neglect of individuals by organization and institution. And this is something that we have seen and read in the news and heard in the news a couple of times, that Staffordshire Council or this council or that council, even Haringey Council that we looked at, was in the news a couple of years earlier, I think in the 2015-16, wherein there was a systematic neglect in terms, and a lot of children were exploited or abused, and essentially, and the council and the head of the council, finally resigned because she and the council were not able to spot this happening, or not able to pick up. The social workers were not able to pick it up. The council was not able to pick it up, and as a result, a very high-level inquiry happened into Haringey Council. So if you do a quick search on the internet, you will see that highlights an example of institutional abuse, wherein neglect essentially by people who are not well trained or not well equipped to understand how abuse is taking place, and that leads to things not being spotted, and this leads to what is called institutional abuse. So it could be physical, emotional, sexual, it could be neglect, it could be exploitation. It includes lots of different types. And then obviously, last but not the least, we look at neglect by others. So in this kind of an abuse, we are looking at people being neglected. That means they're left on their own to be able to take care of their basic needs. So the example in the video, which was of the old person left in the house, wherein, lots of papers had collected, the house wasn't very clean, and he wasn't receiving support from the local council, is an example of neglect. No caregiver coming in to, help him with his daily chores, or no social worker or regular social workers visits happening, which meant that, the person had fallen into neglect, and that would have meant that the person's physical, emotional, medical needs are not being met, and the local authorities or the social workers or the authorities in general are not able to, obviously provide the adequate support which is required. And later on in the example, it basically shown that the social care worker alerts the council, and obviously the council then moves him to a different property because he was living and could have, been in the harm's way because of the accumulation of newspapers within his apartment. We also talk about different types. So here we are looking at physical abuse, psychological abuse, and abuse because of self-neglect. So when we talk about physical abuse, going into a bit more detail, individual slides, we are talking about physical abuse being you're hitting, kicking, choking, or using weapons to inflict harm. And this could be examples of physical abuse. Again, in the video, we looked at an example. A scenario wherein the child's mom, had spanked the child and there was a bruise on his arm, and he said, no, it fell down. Later on, she agreed. And obviously the council then put in parenting tips and course for the person to be able to, look at good parenting guides. And that was an example of physical abuse. Psychological abuse tends to be when you talk about, obviously manipulating people or using techniques like gaslighting, and they would then be looking at humiliating a person. And long-term effects of psychological abuse tend to be that the people, who undergo this abuse tend to have then mental disorders, and including depression, anxiety, and they have what is called the PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, because they become insecure, they become unsure about what they are thinking and, how they feel and how they can explain things. This is systematically toiling with somebody's, brain and thinking capacity, cognitive skills, to be able to bring them down in terms of, making them unsure about their own abilities, and the person losing self-confidence and self-esteem, and thereby, falling into what is called the psychological abuse. Now, there are other forms of abuse on which I've created slides. And the reason I've done that is one of the big ones that we look at, which is currently, a major cause of concern, where again, an example was taken of the girl which became an orphan at the age of 10, then was trafficked to Russia. From there, she was trafficked to the UK. And obviously that led to social workers and obviously coming in and, freeing her at some stage, because she was being used or being forced to, work as an example of modern slavery, essentially. And in that also, she was being physically abused and sexually abused. So this type of an abuse, which is an unwanted behavior imposed onto an individual without consent, tends to be very seriously taken and is one of the main, bits that we look at when we talk about physical abuse in general. And this is, regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, has very long-lasting and symptoms, both psychologically and physically, affect the victim. So this is an example wherein children are especially more vulnerable. Single parents are maybe more vulnerable, or people which have vulnerabilities can be open to sexual abuse, and that is where councils, agencies, social care workers are, and friends, relatives, anybody who's forming a support unit around that individual is requested, or is instructed essentially to keep their eyes and ears and open to be able to observe this, because this is very difficult to spot sometimes in the context of modern slavery. Now, what I've done in the subsequent slides is I've gone into a lot of detail of 3 different types of abuses. Now, I've written and taken all the 9-10 types which we need to be aware of under safeguarding, but what I would suggest is the first assessment criteria requires you to understand 3 of the 10 different types of abuse, which could be physical, it could be neglect, and it could be, say, for example, in this case, sexual abuse or financial abuse. And what you need to be able to do is basically put those in context by explaining what are the types of, abuse that the person can experience or go through in this case. So some of these slides basically would, detail out the different types of abuse, and you could look at, essentially going through these in a bit more detail, and then also help cover the assessment criteria. Is there any doubt on this? Any questions on this particular assessment criteria?
No.
Anybody else? Any doubts on this? Any questions on this? I've covered them in detail on the slides is because you need to understand all the types of abuse and what are the symptoms and signs to discover when this abuse is actually happening. So that is the second part, is that once you understand that these type of abuse is happening, whether it's through harm, self-neglect, or physical abuse, what we need to be able to do in the second assessment criteria is identify the signs and symptoms of any of these 3 types of abuse. Okay, I know that there is an abuse happening because of, say, for example, discrimination. It could be that I've been called names, or I've been discriminated because of my age, my disability, my gender, my background, my religion, whatever it is. But how do you spot this in terms of the abuse happening? That is the second assessment criteria. So I know there's a physical abuse happening. I know abuse is happening by bullying, or there's an institutional abuse happening. But how do you spot the signs and symptoms of the different types of abuse is what the second assessment criteria is. So after studying the types of following types of abuses, 9 different types, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different types. What we want to be doing is any 3 different types that we can understand, we need to be able to spot the signs and symptoms of it. So what I've done in the subsequent slide is what I have looked at the symptoms and signs of 3 different types of abuse. So first is we look at psychological or emotional abuse. Now, how do we spot that this is happening? So first of all, if we look at enforced self or social isolation, if you see psychological abuse, if parenting, for example, is happening, and if as a parent you are being harsh with your children, you might lock them up into a room, and that would be enforced social isolation. A child is young, does not understand, could fear, could get and fear being lonely in the room. It could lead to some sort of a mental trauma. But this is a sign which is, when you put the person or the child in a room and isolate him without light, or for example, in the room for a number of hours, this could be an example of enforced social isolation. An example of that we saw in the video, wherein the mom goes to the place of work and the child is able to speak to the social care worker through the letterbox. And that is an example of enforced social isolation. So instead of going to the school or going and playing at this age, the child is actually left in the home. And that is, a form of neglect, but it is basically contributing towards psychological and emotional abuse. So here is where we need to look at Cyberbullying, which is another area wherein we do get to see and hear lots in the news, and people or young children taking their lives because they've been bullied over the internet, on Instagram, on Facebook, and things like that, and social media in particular. And that has created reverse pressures of psychological, they're being unsure, they're not feeling confident about themselves, they're feeling, vulnerable. And in some extreme cases, some of them have ended up taking their life. Now, what are the symptoms is what we need to understand in this particular task. So what are the signs and symptoms or indicators of physical, psychological and emotional abuse? Number one, if we have to identify psychological and emotional abuse, we see an air of silence, that there is no conversation or chit chat happening with the parents, between the parents and the children, and you see an air of silence. There is withdrawal. That means you don't want to get into discussions, you run away from discussions, or you stay isolated in your room or in your house. Loss of memory, insomnia, low self-esteem. You're looking at a change of appetite, sudden losses in weight, or more gain in weight. These are signs and symptoms or indicators of that the person is undergoing psychological or emotional abuse. You would lose weight, you would lose your appetite. In some cases, people take to eating. If they feel nervous, if they feel not confident, if they feel left out, if they feel isolated, what they will do is they'll take the support of, eating. And eating makes them feel better. They feel a bit, drowsy, and then obviously sleep. This is a sign, an indicator of what would be where you pick out psychological / emotional abuse. The second one that I picked out is domestic violence or abuse. So there are lots of people who are, especially women, sometimes are subjected to domestic violence. And this can happen in different ways: psychological, it can be physical, it can be sexual, financial, emotional. Now, what are the signs and indicators of this kind of an abuse happening? One, you would see the person suffers lowest self-esteem. They feel that they are, you would normally see them that they have cuts, bruises on their body. There are physical signs which that is what you can actually see. Sometimes you would see the persons do not meet eye to eye. They are very nervous. They're very shy. They know that if they go out and talk or, open or say something openly, then they are going to be open to verbal abuse or humiliation or public humiliation. Sometimes these are signs and symptoms that we need to be able to spot, and they would give us a clear idea or a steer in the direction that people are, the person who's acting in this way is actually being subjected to some sort of domestic violence or abuse. And this is what we need to be able to look at when we look at domestic violence and abuse. So there could be honor killings. We have looked at a lot of news, and we've heard about these which are called honor killings. So if girls want to, sometimes in certain cultures they want to marry or they don't want to marry, and they are forced into marriages, you would see honor killings, parents killing their children. So this is a sign of domestic abuse or violence. It is, when we talk about FGM, this is a training which most, healthcare workers, even teachers like us, undergo when we look at taking a training on female genital mutilation. In certain cultures, in certain countries, obviously girls, they prefer boys. Parents to prefer to have boys rather than girls. Or obviously in some cultures, if they have females or, have children which are girls, then, they are neglected. And obviously, this would mean that in some cases, they look at destroying female genitals, and this is termed as female genital mutilation, which is a procedure wherein the genitals of female are deliberately cut, injured, or changed, so that there are and medical reasons are given. And this then means that in some cases female goes through the girl child goes through a lot of trauma and obviously physical injuries, which basically delays basically can be life threatening. And that is where female circumcision or cutting, or, and there are lots of other terms which are there, but it's all covered under the topic of, female genital mutilation. Forced marriages, honor killings, they are examples of physical domestic abuse, which can be spotted by, looking at acts of threats, humiliation, intimidation, punishments, which can be done, that you're not allowed to go out of the house, you're locked away in your room, you're given one meal a day, you're not fed properly, you're not allowed to use the basic facilities within the house, you're starved in terms of resources, which could be financial resources or other types of resources like food and clothing. And this creates a frightening behavior. And in those cases, people who, go through this kind of an abuse would be looking at physical oblique domestic violence and abuse. And the signs would be, these are the signs that you look at when you pick out. So there are lots of different types of abuse, 10 different types. What we need to be able to do is basically look at picking out any 3, and in that pick out signs that we see, which are signs which allow us to see into and read into that this person is being, is being abused, this person is being put in the harm's way, this person is being neglected, and as a result of neglect is being put into harm's way and is being abused or intimidated. And that would be the signs and symptoms or indicators that we need to pick out when we discuss about, 3 types of abuses, specifically in assessment criteria 1.2. Any questions on this? So this brings us to the end of today's discussion on learning outcome 1, which is to understand safeguarding. And what and how do we recognize signs of abuse or harm, and look at this and put this in the context of safeguarding principles and safeguarding, from a point of view of ensuring that individuals are not put in the harm's way by implementing, the Safeguarding Act, which is a part of the Care Act of 2014. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you so much for attending. If there are any questions at this stage, I'll be happy to take. Any questions, anybody?
No question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's meaning no assignment on this yet.
No, we are not doing any assignment on this yet because we have just started the unit. So there's no assignment to be done on this unit so far. We're going to be covering this unit for the next 4 sessions. And then when we have covered all the 4 learning outcomes, today we have done ILO1, learning outcome 1. When we cover 2, 3, and 4, we will do an assignment discussion, and then we will look at doing the assignment on this unit.
Okay.
Okay. There is a good amount of reading that you can do on one of the websites. I'll send you a link of this, which is the Sky website, Social Care for Institute and Excellence. This particular website is where I've taken some of the data from, and this website will give you an insight into what is safeguarding, what are the principles of safeguarding, what are your responsibilities. If you want to read into this, it presents pretty much, the concept of safeguarding in a couple of pages very nicely. So this is something which I would suggest as an additional read. And this link is essentially given towards the end of the presentation, in learning outcome 1, just to briefly show that to you. And that should be done as an additional reading to understand what we've discussed today. So I put this link here, and this is towards the end of the presentation, for you to go in and do some additional reading. Okay, good stuff. So I'll catch up with you next week. For those of you who have joined the session, great. If not, then I'm going to try and put the link across just after this meeting on the group, so that you're able to, if you need to revise or revisit this session, you can do so at your own time, and then I will catch up with you next week.
Rahman, can I speak to you after, please?
All right. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'll give you a ring after that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, have a good